Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this new session of the summarized version of the Quran. Uh, we had started the description of Surah Al-Araf, the seventh Surah of the Quran. Uh, Today we will start from verse 147 of the Surah. We talked about the fact yesterday that Musa alayhi salam, when he went to meet the Almighty um, at his invitation and was able to talk to him, literally, the Quran says. Uh, he asked the Almighty for him to be able to see him. And we saw that the response was that that's not possible. Thereafter, the Quran mentions in verse 145, وَكَتَبْنَا فِي الْأَلْوَاحِ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مَوْعِظَةً وَتَفْصِيلًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. He was given those commandments. There were tablets, and we wrote for him in the tablets, min kulli shay'in mawizatan, instructions for all things, but tafsilan li kulli shay, and details of everything. Now, this mention is a style of presentation which needs to be understood in its context. If that is not happening, then what you will understand, and as a consequence, what you will conclude is most certainly going to be something problematic, because obviously we are talking about the Quran. So the Almighty gave instructions and the details of everything that was needed by Moses and his companions at the time when these instructions were given. There are some people who have incorrectly understood by this expression that he was given details of everything, literally everything. No, that's not a good understanding, appreciation of language. You know, languages, they have their own principles, and if you're not sound in the understanding of a certain language, then you're likely to commit blunders. So, in brief, what the Almighty mentioned here was that Moses was provided with instructions and guidance of everything that was needed at the time when this guidance was being provided. Then we move on to verse 150, where the Almighty tells us, وَلَمَّا رَجَعَ مُوسَى إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ غَضْبَانَ أَسِفًا. When Moses returned to his nation, angry as well as grieved, he was obviously grieved at the fact that people had resorted to polytheism. They had created a calf for it to be worshipped. How is it possible? And he was angry as well. I mean, under his very nose, his brother being there with them, and yet they were indulged in worshipping anyone other than God. How is it possible? It only honestly is something unimaginable. Muslims, like children of Israel, were also Muslims at their time, who knew what the message of God was, and they would worship, and they would, you know, not only worship, but if somebody else worships or prostrates before non-God uh, deities, they have no problems. They have nothing to say against it. Is mind-boggling. So the obvious reaction of Moses was he was angry, furious, and was in grief. Uh, then we move on to the verse 156, where we are informed that the Almighty mentions the prayer of Musa alayhi salam. After having repented to the Almighty for whatever wrong happened, he first blamed his brother. His brother explained that I did not intervene beyond a certain point because I feared that in your absence they're going to be they're going to break into factions and you'll blame me for causing disunity amongst the children of Israel. Obviously, it was an ijtihad, it was an immediate decision that he had to take, and there can always be disputes when somebody takes a decision with good intentions and it goes wrong. He prayed, Musa alayhi salam prayed to the Almighty and said, Waktub lana fi hazihi dunya hasana. And please write for our benefit in our favor in this life also goodness. وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ إِنَّا هُدْنَا إِلَيْكَ. And in the hereafter, indeed, we have turned to you. We ask for your guidance. And the Almighty responded by saying that Azabi usibu bihi man asha. My punishment is going to be inflicted on whom I will. I know better and I will do it and would not restrain from causing people who deserve to be punished. They'll get punishment. However, وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. My mercy, it is one thing that encompasses all others. That is, Allah Almighty, He has all the great attributes, but His one attribute that encompasses, that overrides all others, is His attribute of mercy. Uh, then He goes on to talk about uh, the fact that this response of the Almighty goes on to mention that God has now decided that this mercy of the Almighty is going to be available for those الذين يتبعون الرسول النبي الأمي, those who are going to follow the messenger who will be the unlettered prophet, the prophet who didn't know how to write, how to read, and his nation did not have the privilege of the Sharia like the children of Israel had. But now that he has been picked to be the source of guidance for the entire mankind, my mercy is going to accompany those people who are going to follow him. And it also mentions that this prophet will come. وَيَضَعُ عَنْهُمْ إِسْرَهُمْ وَالْأَغْلَالَ الَّتِي كَانَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ. He is going to relieve them, the people, of the evils, of the shackles which were upon them, the burdens and the shackles. That is, the burdens and shackles of the strict, stringent, difficult, unnecessary instructions or Sharia expectations. The Almighty gave a simple religion to follow, even to the earlier people, as well as in the latest version of his message. In the case of the earlier people, there were two things that happened. There were many people who, right at the time when the prophets were there in their midst, they started flouting the Sharia. They started playing tricks, deceiving the prophets so that they could somehow um, not be forced to do what was expected of them. They wanted to dodge and be not responsible for acting upon Sharia. With that kind of an attitude, the Almighty decided that they're going to be punished with an even more strict version of Sharia than was ordinarily required of them, which was simple. The other problem that took place was that their scholars went for an unnecessary, restrictive approach towards God's law, something that we find even today. Uh, the Almighty mentions over and over again that His Sharia is simple, it is doable. There is only a very brief, short list of it. But unfortunately, you go to most of the people and they'll find that on top of what has been given by the Almighty, there is a long list of unnecessary details which people have accepted in the name of religion, in the name of Sharia. The Almighty is mentioned that the last prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, came apart from uh, the reasons to achieve other purposes. One important purpose was that he should relieve people of the burdens and the shackles that were thereon upon them in the name of his religion. And then it goes on to mention, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ وَعَزَّرُوهُ وَنَصَرُوهُ وَاتَّبَعُوا النُّورَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ مَعَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. So those who will believe in him and will honor him and support him in the cause that he was following and would follow the light, that is the Quran, that he has brought, those are the ones who will be successful. So after the story of Moses, the Almighty is now mentioning in the same flow this clear understanding that those prophets have come and gone. They were all great representatives of the Almighty's message. But now we are in the times when this last message is the expectation of the Almighty for all peoples, all religious people to understand and follow. Then we move on to verse 158, which says that this message is for everyone. All humanity now should look at the message of Islam, the last message, and it should be delivered to everyone. So it says, Qul ya ayyuhan nas, say, O people, inni rasulullahi ilaykum jami'an. I am God's messenger for you, all of you. That's what is the status of the last prophet. May God's mercy be on him. So, this is obviously, if this reality is understood and appreciated by us Muslims, we would behave accordingly. We would try to invite others in a wise way, polite manner. Have it at the back of our minds that this important task has to be undertaken. Because this message, it's a reality that it's meant for everyone. Then the surah moves on to uh, an important subject, which is the topic of what is called the covenant of Alast, Ahd Alast. God tells us that the reason why shirk, polytheism, is unacceptable is that the unity and oneness of God is deeply ingrained in human nature. And this has happened because there is an experience that the entire humanity was required to go through, an experience whose memory has been lost, it has been deleted, but its effect, influence is still there. You see, it does happen sometimes that there is something that happened in our lives. We don't have the memory of it, but we have certain signs, traces, which lead us to understand that there's something that happened, but we've forgotten it. So likewise, there's something that happened to us even before when we came to this world, when we were in some spiritual form. The Quran says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ, and mention when your Lord took from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants. That is, they all emerged gradually, one from the other, and the entire humankind was there from Adam till the last person, and made them to testify of themselves, saying, Alastu birabbikum, am I not your Lord? This is what God asked. Qalu bala. They said, yes, we have testified. The Almighty goes on to say that this we did, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, indeed we were unaware of it. So in order to make it unacceptable for anyone to present an excuse that they did shirk, they ascribed partners with God, because they didn't know that it was wrong. It was their elders who did it. Aw taqulu, or lest you say it was only that our fathers associated others in worship with God, and we were descendants after them. So what could we do? We were just, you know, people who followed their tradition. Then would you destroy us for what these people who were evildoers doing? So this experience of alast is what has caused any argument to support the cause of polytheism, shirk, to be completely eliminated. Something that is there in your nature cannot be denied. I mean, obviously, a person will not be able to present an excuse before the Almighty in favor of telling lies and cheating by saying that it was my elders who were doing it. So, why am I wrong? What's my fault? Obviously, the answer would be that you knew it even if your elders were doing it, that cheating, committing frauds is wrong. Then we are given an example to understand what happened to the children of Israel, the Jews. The Quran says, "Batlu alayhim naba allazi atainahu ayatina," and relate to them, O Prophet, the news of somebody whom we gave our signs. We enabled them to have the potential, the possibility of being true servants of God and to be the representatives of his message. But what happened was, فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا, he detached himself from them. The person, instead of taking the opportunity and making the best of it, just went away, detached himself from what was given. فَأَتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانُ, so Satan pursued him. فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ, and he became amongst those who deviate, who go astray. So, in other words, these people were provided with an excellent opportunity to come close to the Almighty, to deliver his message, and thus be uh, his, his favorites. But what happened was that they didn't live up to the expectations. And instead of being loyal to the message, they just ignored it. It's mentioned before the Muslims so that they realize that now it's their turn. They have God's message. If they're going to take it seriously, uh, they will they will benefit nobody except on their own selves. But if they are going to run away, if they're going to ignore it, if they're not going to bother to understand it properly, then they too will meet with the same fate as did the children of Israel, the Jews. Towards the end of the Surah Al-Anfal, what we find is that the Almighty is telling us that in verse 204, وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ, when the Quran is recited, فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ, listen to it carefully, وَأَنصِتُوا, and keep quiet, pay attention, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, so that you are dealt with mercifully, you receive mercy. It's so unfortunate that there are people, Muslims, who put on the recitation of the Quran aloud and they don't even bother to listen to it. It's more like, God forbid, a background music for them. There are many people who are in the practice of loudly putting on a recitation of some particular surah when they open their shops, etc. There are others who have loud recitation in their homes um, for barakah, for blessings, for getting rid of jinns and God knows what. The Quran is not meant for any of these things. I'm not denying their role, their effectiveness of the Quranic surahs and verses in these matters. But when it's recited, it has to be respected by being listened to. We should listen to the Quran attentively and remain quiet, focus on it. The Quran says, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ فِي نَفْسِكَ تَضَرُّعًا وَخِيفًا, and remember your Lord within yourself, inside your soul, in humility and in fear. وَدُونَ الْجَهْرِ مِنَ الْقَوْلِ, and without being loud. بِالْعُغْدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ, in the mornings and evenings. God should be remembered all the time. Remembering God all the time really means that the life you are leading, this life has always got to include God, His role. We should thank Him, we should seek His help, we should explain everything that is happening in the light of our faith in Allah, in God. وَلَا تَكُنْ مِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ, and don't be amongst those people who are ghafil, heedless, who are not bothering to remember Him. And the final verse says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ, those who are with God, close to Him, that is angels, لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِهِ, they never stay away from His worship out of ignorance. فَيُسَبِّحُونَهُ, and they exalt Him, do His tasbih, وَلَهُ يَسْجُدُونَ, and they prostrate. So when angels do it, you too follow them. This is what your Creator deserves. After Surah Al-Araf, the next surah is Surah Al-Anfal. This is the first of the two Madanan surahs of the second group of surahs. As I've been saying in the explanation of the gist of these surahs, the first Surah Al-An'am that we did of this group was an invitation to the people of Mecca. The second Surah, Surah Al-Araf, that we have just finished, was a clear warning to the people that if they are going to continue to reject the message and remain firm in their shirk, polytheistic ways, then they're going to be punished in this very life. This punishment they cannot escape. So this is a surah of warning. Now, after warning, obviously the next step is punishment. But before the punishment is inflicted, we have Surah Al-Anfal, the eighth surah of the Quran, which is talking about the preparation for that punishment. Now, the preparation of punishment in Surah Anfal, the way we're going to see it, has three different aspects. The first aspect is the preparation of believers. They have been guided and instructed to behave in a way that they become deserving candidates for inflicting God's punishment on the enemies. So the believers have been asked that they should behave. They should be God conscious. They should not be obsessively inclined towards worldly possessions and should remember the Almighty, recite His verses. They have been picked for a very important task. They cannot behave like ordinary people. The second aspect of the preparation is that the Almighty got rid of the leaders of Quraysh in Battle of Badr, which is what has been discussed in this surah. So the ultimate punishment came after the first line of kufr was eliminated, so that the others were given a chance to consider the message and thus be able to make a fresh visit of the message and under no pressure of the leaders of Quraysh. So the leaders were eliminated, and it's mentioned in this surah. The third part is the military preparation of the believers for the jihad that was meant to inflict God's punishment on the kuffar, those who rejected the message. It also talks about the fact that now the city of Medina is going to be the center where everybody else would migrate, and they will become a force from where the punishment, the ultimate punishment, is going to be inflicted upon the enemy. So the surah starts by saying, Yes, alunaka anil anfal. O Prophet, they ask you about the spoils of war. Um, when in those days people would get involved in a battle, they had a motivation of getting a part of the spoils of war if they would win the war and the enemy would run away, leaving behind assets. So there were some weak Muslims who, at the time of the Battle of Badr, they had the same uh, inclination. They were looking for the spoils of war. The Almighty says, they ask you about Anfal, the spoils of war. Qulil anfalu lillahi wa rasul. Tell them they are for God and the Messenger. It's not for them. You have come to fight here for the sake of God. You're doing it fi sabilillah. Why do you even have the thought of these worldly matters in your mind? Fattaqullah. So fear God. Wa aslihu zata bainikum. And amend, that is, the differences that are there between you. Correct yourselves. And Wa'ati'ullaha wa'ati'ur Rasul. Obey God and obey the Messenger in kuntum mu'minin, if you are truly believers. Innamal mu'minun allazina iza zukirallah. True believers indeed are those who, when God is mentioned before them, wajilat qulubuhum, their hearts are fearful. Wa iza tuliyat alayhim ayatuhu, and when his verses are recited before them, zadathum imanan, their faith increases. وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ, and they trust their Lord. So these are the people that God wanted them to be. Allazina yuqimuna salah, those who establish regular prayers. Wa mimma razaqnahum yunfiqun, and from what we have given them in sustenance, they spend. They spend on the poor. This is the beginning of the surah, and it is setting the tone. It's clearly stating, as if, that the Almighty's decision is around the corner. He is going to implement that decision of inflicting his punishment on the enemies of his message through these companions of the Prophet. But the companions have to behave befittingly, or else they're not going to get this all important privilege. We move on to verse 7, which, as I said, this surah is talking about the Battle of Badr, which was the first installment of the punishment of the Almighty that was inflicted upon the kuffar, those who rejected the message of Islam despite knowing it to be true. They rejected it arrogantly. وَإِذْ يَعِدُكُمُ اللَّهُ إِحْدَى الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ. Remember, recall the time when يَعِدُكُمُ, O believers, God promised you إِحْدَى الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ, one of the two groups. There were two groups, as if converging towards Medina. One was coming from the east, the Meccan soldiers, 1,000 in number, led by the leaders of Quraysh, and their intention was to get rid of Muslims. And from the western side, there was this trade caravan led by Abu Sufyan. So, in order for having an idea about how Muslims feel, to get an idea about their morale, they were given a choice. Which of the two groups do you think we should go for? So obviously, um, the decision was clear, but then there was this intention behind this choice given that if everybody gets involved in fighting the enemy in the right spirit, that's what really needed to be achieved. Or else, the weakness in the ranks of Muslims could also be identified if they would have a different opinion. And that is exactly how it happened. It was said that one of the groups God has decided is for you. You're going to go and you'll be able to overpower them. وَتَوَدُّونَ أَنَّ غَيْرَ ذَاتِ الشَّوْكَةِ تَكُونُ لَكُمْ. What happened was that you wished that the one that was unarmed should be yours. وَيُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ. But on the other hand, God had intended that he should establish the truth بِكَلِمَاتِهِ, by his decisions, وَيَقْطَعَ دَابِرَ الْكَافِرِينَ, and eliminate the kuffar, the disbelievers, to cut off the very roots of the disbelievers. لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ, so that he should establish the truth, وَيُبْطِلَ الْبَاطِلَ, and abolish and destroy falsehood, وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُجْرِمُونَ, even if those who were criminals, they would dislike it. It's unfortunate that when you read the books of Sirah, there are people who have given this understanding that Muslims went after the trade caravan and, God forbid, looted it. And, for that purpose, they went there. And when this information went to the people of Mecca, they came out and with the intention of fighting Muslims. The fact that the Quran mentions is that the decision to destroy the Quraysh leadership was taken beforehand. And it was simply for the purpose of finding out what exactly is the intention of the Muslim soldiers. Uh, they were given this choice, apparently. But the opinion of those who wanted the trade caravan to be the target of their attack, their opinion was rejected. And the Almighty says that He intended that falsehood should be destroyed and the truth should prevail. Then we move on to verse 17, which talks about the fact that in the Battle of Badr, what happened was God's punishment. So it says, فَلَمْ تَقْتُلُوهُمْ. So, believers, you did not kill them. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ قَتَلَهُمْ. Instead, it was God who killed them. That is, it was not an ordinary battle. It was a battle that was between the enemies of God's message and God's soldiers. It were the angels who came down and did the job. The believing soldiers, they were only there to complete the task. Their task was only to be there present and implement apparently what the angels were doing for them. This clarification was important. You didn't kill them. Instead, it was God who killed them. It was important to mention, Vama Ramaita is Ramaita, Walakinna Allah Rama. O Prophet, you did not throw those pebbles when you threw them. Walakinna Allah Rama. Instead, it was God who threw them. It is said that he picked some pebbles of soil from the ground in his hand and he threw it at the kuffar and mentioned Sha'at al-Wuju. It was a prayer for their destruction. And it turned into a storm. Now, all this was happening as a punishment. If this clarification was not made, later people could have thought that there is justification for fighting against non-Muslims for the sake of religion, for the sake of Islam and its glory. The Almighty has clarified that this was only a punishment, like the punishment that was inflicted upon the disbelieving nations of the earlier times. The only difference was that while in the earlier cases, most of the cases, it were natural calamities, one natural calamity or another, that was employed for the purpose of destroying those nations. This time round, it were the swords of the believers that were employed for the purpose of getting rid of the disbelievers. But it was God's punishment. I mean, how could anybody kill anyone else simply because they don't believe? You can't kill. I mean, it would be a contradiction in the Quranic text, which is not possible. The Quran says, if you kill one person, it is as if you have killed the entire mankind. So how is it that while this statement is there on the one hand, the Quran would say that you go on and kill these people? So this clarification was important. That is why it is rightly pointed out by Ghamdi Sahab that when you are writing a book on Sirah and you write about these incidents that took place in Medina, the title caption should be that it is the mention of killings by God, done by God, people who were killed by God. That's a clarification that needs to be understood by us in the light of the Quran. And that's the clarification that we need to give to the world at large. That's the understanding which, because it has not been appreciated, to me, it has become the biggest tragedy of our times. And I really mean it. It's a big tragedy because A, when Muslims have not understood that the mention of this jihad and killing in the Quran was actually the punishment of the Almighty for the people who rejected the message. Because this has not been understood and appreciated, the Muslims normally believe that this jihad must go on. We must fight the enemy. And who are the enemies? The non-believers. The other reason why it really is the biggest tragedy is that it was the message of Islam that was meant to guide humankind, to enlighten them, to take them out of the gloom of despair, to let them know what the Almighty's plan was. But how can this plan be introduced to people? How can people be impressed with it if they have this understanding that Muslims, they kill others in the name of God for the sake of their religion? It's mentioned over here. You know, you can't imagine how disastrous it has been, this understanding, this incorrect interpretation. People, the superpowers, America, etc., they know what Muslims understand. They know what their motivation, their ultimate goal is. Whenever they're going to get power, whenever they're going to get militarily strong, they're going to destroy everyone. They will. It's their goal that they have to dominate the world. So don't be surprised if they make preemptive strikes. So it really needs to be understood in the light of the Quran that what happened at the time of the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, happened because of a certain policy of the Almighty, certain rules which are only exclusive for the times when the messenger is there himself. They are era specific. We move on to verse 22, and the Almighty is clarifying the reason why these people were punished. He says, Inna sharrat dawab indallah. Indeed, the worst of the creatures in the eyes of God, as-summul bukmul lazina la yaqilun, are those who are deaf and dumb. La yaqilun. They don't use their intellect. They don't use reason. So imagine those people who don't use reason and their intellect are described as worst creatures, worse than beasts, because it's your intellect, it's your ability to reason, which makes you humans, makes you what you are. You have a thinking mind. It needs to be applied. You need to understand. If you are overwhelmed by emotions, biases, you are influenced by people who have the ability to influence you by their rhetoric, by fiery speeches, then what good are we? So it's mentioned about these people, the kuffar. They were worse than beasts because they would not use reason. They were just following their forefathers, their ancestors. Whatever religion they got from their ancestors is what they followed. And they were deaf and dumb. They were deaf in that they would not listen to the truth and understand it by analyzing it. They were dumb. They would not speak the truth. So that's about them. And it really goes on to clarify that, in religion, it is your intellect which plays pivotal role. Without intellect, without understanding, without analyzing, you can't understand God's message. And it also links with the verse that we've just read in Surah Al-Araf. Listen to the Quran. Listen carefully. I mean, it's not something that is meant to make you feel satisfied and content because of the beautiful voices of the Qaris and the way they recite. It's not music, it's a message which needs to be understood. Verse 30 uh, goes on to mention the reason why these people became deserving of God's punishment. It says, وَإِذْ يَمْكُرُ بِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِيُثْبِتُوكَ. And remember, O Prophet, and remember, O believers, that when those who disbelieved, they plotted against you, O Prophet, لِيُثْبِتُوكَ, so that they might imprison you, أَوْ يَقْتُلُوكَ, or kill you, أَوْ يُخْرِجُوكَ, or evict you, draw you away from the land, from Mecca. وَيَمْكُرُونَ, and they were conspiring. وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ, and God was also planning. وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ, God is the best of the planners. Makr is to plan quietly and secretly. If it's evil, it's an evil planning, conspiracy. But if it's positive, then obviously it's for good purpose. So God has planned. He implements it in a subtle, quiet way, and his plan always prevails. Then we go to verse 37, where the Almighty is telling us that the reason why these kuffar disbelievers were fought against was that the Almighty had a plan that these people who denied, who rejected the message, they were evil, they were khabis, impure, and they had to be dealt with. This theme you would find mentioned in the Quran all over the text, that those who do not believe when the message is presented to them properly are evil people. They're criminals. They're the sin within them, the evil within them doesn't allow them to understand the message, and therefore they turn disbelievers. So that the Almighty says that I have asked you, O believers, to fight against them and to take them to task. لِيَمِيزَ اللَّهُ الْخَبِيثَ مِنَ الطَّيِّبِ, so that God may distinguish the impure from the pure, the wicked from the good. وَيَجْعَلُ الْخَبِيثَ بَعْضَهُ عَلَى بَعْضٍ, and place the impure, some of them upon others, make a heap of them. فَيَرْكُمَهُ, and then جَمِيعًا فَيَجْعَلُهُ فِي جَهَنَّمْ, and then to put them all into the hell. So, they were all brought together and they were punished when they were together. They formed a heap and then it was thrown into the hell. That is, this punishment was inflicted here in this life, and in the next life, this entire group is going to end up in the hell. Ulaika humul khasirun. These are the people who are the ones who have lost their case. They are the losers. And then in verse 52, the Almighty is telling us that this punishment of the kuffar is not something new. It has always been the case with people who have rejected the messengers. So the Quran says, كَذَابِ آلِ فِرَوْنَ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. What happened to these people, the leaders of Quraysh of Mecca, was the same way. It was the same policy like it happened to Pharaoh and those before them. كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ. They all rejected, denied the verses of the Almighty. فَأَخَذَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. So God seized them because of their sins. In Allah Qabiyyun Shadidul Iqab. Indeed, God is powerful and severe in penalty. The signs of the Almighty, the statements of the prophets, the verses, they were rejected. They rejected God living in His kingdom, and they went on doing it over and over again, despite getting so many chances. It's mentioned in Surah Al-Araf, we found yesterday. Pharaoh was given opportunities after opportunities, but they didn't avail them, and they became deserving of being punished. Now we move on to verse 60, which, as I said earlier, in this surah, quite apart from the fact that we are talking about the preparedness of believers for the punishment to be inflicted, it talks about the first installment of punishment. It also talks about the military material preparedness of believers for jihad. So this is what we find in verse 60, where the Almighty says, وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِّبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ. And believers, prepare against them with whatever you are able to, with power, that is, with ammunitions, arms, whatever is available, and of horses of war, by which you may terrify the enemy of God. تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ وَآخَرِينَ مِن دُونِهِمْ, and others apart from them. So, your preparation for war, for battle, should cause terror in the hearts of these disbelievers. They've already been terrified. God has caused the punishment to, to already be there in their hearts, and they are fearful. So you got to chip in with your contribution by making preparations. And then in verse 65 and 66, there is important instruction given regarding this jihad which was to be undertaken. You see, God implements his plan in this world according to certain rules. I mean, it's not that he ransacks, destroys, completely eliminates um, people without involving anything. Even in the case of natural calamities, the natural calamities take place the way they take place. It's not just done in one go, in a split of second. There are clouds that come, there is rainfall, it falls so much, so abundantly that it becomes you know, flooded, the place is flooded, like in the case of Noah, and they get drowned. So there is a process. Every time God implements his plan, a certain process is followed. So the Muslims have been asked that, if you're going to fight the enemy, know what the rules are. So the Quran says, Ya ayyuhan Nabi, verse 65, believer, O Prophet, Arridil Mu'mineen al Qital. You motivate, urge believers for jihad, for the battle. In yakum minkum ishruna sabirun yaghlibu mi'atayn. If there are going to be 20 steadfast believers fighting against the enemy, they are going to overpower 200. وَإِن يَكُن مِّنكُم مِّيَةٌ. And if you are going to be 100, يَغْلِبُوا أَلْفًا مِّنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. You are going to overpower 1,000 of the disbelievers. بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. This is going to happen because these people don't understand. Now this is verse 65. Verse 66 says something different. Quite obviously, verse 66 was revealed after several years when there were a large number of newcomers who entered the fold of Islam. And the verse says, Al-an khaffafallahu ankum. Now God has lightened the expectation from you. Wa alima anna fikum dhafa. And He knows that weakness has crept into your ranks. Newcomers have come. They're not quite as strong in their faith. They've not been quite as much trained as the people who entered Islam, the fold of Islam earlier. So God's help would come in accordance with your commitment and sincerity. Now that the standard has fallen down, the rule is فَإِن minkum miyatun sabiratun. If there are going to be 100 of you steadfast, yaglibu miyatain, they're going to overpower 200. وَإِن minkum alfun. And if you're going to be 1,000 in number, yaglibu, then they're going to overpower alfain, 2,000, biznillah, by the will of God. Wallahu ma'as sabirin. And God is along with those. Means God supports those who are steadfast. So, in other words, it's not that you've been asked to commit suicide by not looking at the number. The number actually meant military strength. Now, how, when we paraphrase and understand numbers, it really is how much military strength we have compared to the enemy. If they are hundreds of times more strong than us, then avoid war battles. Don't commit suicides. You are causing thousands of innocent men, women, and children. 30,000 plus have been killed. Why did it start? Why are we not shouting at it? We are taking out processions against Israel and America. Yes, they are evil. Yes, they're cruel. But what about us? Why did we ignore what the Quran has said? You cannot fight, even if there is a legitimate reason. If you are so weak that the proportion of strength between you and the enemy is, it has to be 1 to 2 for you to get God's help. There's no help coming. So, unfortunately, time and again, we believers, we ignore what the Almighty says, and the end result is that we suffer and we don't even realize it. That's the biggest tragedy. Towards the very end of the surah, verse 74 and 75, it's mentioned that now believers should get together at one place. It says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَحَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And those who believe, and those who have migrated, and those who do jihad, fight in the way of God. وَالَّذِينَ آوَوا وَنَصَرُوا. And those who gave them shelter to those who migrated. وَنَصَرُوا. And they helped. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ حَقًّا. This is now a group of believers who are really truly believers. لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَرِزْقٌ كَرِيمٌ. For them is going to be forgiveness and sustenance provision noble. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِن بَعْدُ. And those who would believe later, وَهَاجَرُوا, and they migrated. Migration to Medina became important for the center from where all jihad was to begin and to spread across. وَجَاهَدُوا, they migrated and they also did jihad ma'akum, with you. أُولَٰئِكَ مِنْكُمْ. They are from amongst you. They are a part of you. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَىٰ بِبَعْضٍ. And relatives who are blood relations, they are more entitled in the law of God, the law of Allah, to your inheritance and other property. That is not being denied. This new relationship is the relationship of faith, of belief. So be together and form a very strong group of believers to inflict God's punishment on the enemy. Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. God indeed knows everything. May the Almighty enable us to understand His message properly and to be able to follow it and let others know about it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.